Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nathan Stretch, and I'm the Manager of Community Development for Kitchener Public Library, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's event. Before we begin the program, I would like to start with a territorial acknowledgement. As we gather, we're reminded that the library is situated on land as the traditional home of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening this community. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet here and reaffirm our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. Thank you for joining us for tonight's book launch and staying with us for our Fall 85 Queen Author events as part of the City of Kitchener's Imagine It series of programs and events. At this time, I'd like to introduce and then invite Dr. Christopher Taylor to the screen, who will introduce tonight's 85 Queen special guest. Following the introduction, Bernie will join Christopher on screen for a conversation. Christopher Stewart Taylor is the Associate Vice President of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism at the University of Waterloo. He is also an assistant professor in the Department of History, and he completed his PhD at Western University in History and Migration and Ethnic Relations. His book, Flying Fish in the Great White North, The Autonomous Migration of Black Barbadians, is available from Fernwood Publishing. He also worked in the Ontario Public Service and began his career as a policy coordinator intern in the Deputy Minister's Office at the Ministry of Labour. He was the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator in the Ministry of the Attorney General's Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Office, a senior policy advisor at Ontario's Anti-Racism Directorate, and manager of Social Justice and Change Cluster at the Ontario Correctional Services College. Dr. Taylor is a proud founding member of the University of Waterloo's Black Faculty Collective. Welcome, Christopher.
Nathan, thank you very much, folks. I really appreciate this invitation this evening. And good evening, folks, and thank you to Kitchener Public Library for inviting me to this 85 Queen book launch and a chance to chat with Bernie tonight. So Bernie Saunders is a retired professional hockey right winger who played 2 seasons in the NHL for the Quebec Nordiques. Yes, for the younger folks on the webinar, Quebec did have a team. He was only the 5th Black hockey player to play in the NHL. Bernie Saunders, Bernie, left hockey in his 20s to pursue a successful career in pharmaceuticals. He is a dual citizen of Canada and the US and currently lives in South Carolina. Bernie's book was just released, and it's a fantastic book, folks. I strongly suggest you go out and get it. October 19th. And before Bernie joins me, I'd like to share a little bit about the book with a synopsis from the publisher, HarperCollins Canada. Quote, Bernie Saunders has a passion for hockey. His prodigious talent was on display at all levels, but because he was Black, he was stymied at every turn and experienced nothing but taunting from opponents, spectators, coaches, and even his own teammates. Despite this malevolence, Saunders continued to play, adopting a style akin to that of the historic house slave. Serve, but remain invisible. Shout out, The Game That Didn't Love Me Black is a memoir about professional hockey by a player who had the potential to become a star, but was blocked at almost every opportunity because of his race. In spite of this, Shutout is a hopeful and uplifting book about facing adversity, overcoming it, and moving ahead. At this time, I invite Bernie to the screen to talk with me about his memoir. Thank you, Bernie, for joining us. We really appreciate this. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for having me.
Christopher. No, we're not in school. This is
Okay.
Christopher. This is first names. If you go Bernie, I'm going to have to call you sir. If you call me Dr. Taylor, we're not going to do that tonight.
Gotcha.
Your book was fantastic. And I mean, I read it from a space of learning about the game, because one thing I want folks to really engage in this is that I found it to be a hockey book, learning the tactics, the training, the skills that takes to move forward and what it's like to be in the, the minor ranks and move your way up. And a big thing, as soon as I open the book, literally the first line, I see, go back to the plantation, you effing N-word. Boom, like first line. I was like, okay. This is how this book is going to be. And throughout the book, you talk about this relationship about with you and the N-word, and particularly when you get into the space about talking about your son in hockey and that word coming up. What does that word mean to you today? And how did it shape, particularly you growing up in hockey? How did that really shape you in that space?
Well, I actually devoted a chapter to the N-word called Sticks and Stones because it's almost impossible for me to describe. It's such a dehumanizing word. To be on the receiving end, especially after 65 years on this planet, I still have this visceral reaction. Like even when I hear my son say it, as an example, the first chapter, as you described it, we wanted to put the reader on the ice and in the action and make them hopefully have some empathy and feel what I was feeling on the ice. But we knew it would lessen the impact if we didn't use the word. But I can't use the word. I can't see it. I don't want to see it on the page. I never want to hear it again, get in my life type of thing. And so we chose, I insisted that we didn't use it. But again, for me, what it means, Christopher, is it basically means no matter how I contribute to society, how well I educate myself, how well I live, with passion and contribute to society, certain people will just see me as, this lesser thing. And it just amazes me. It just seems so silly to me. But obviously, you being a Black man too, it's just something that we've dealt with our entire lives.
And I mean, I'm glad you said that about, how people can relate to your book, because I think, depending on the person's identity, they're going to have a different relation to your book. And for me, picking this up, like I said, the first line, I said, oh, okay, here we go. What kind of lessons can we teach from your book, especially around the N-word, to especially a Canadian audience? Because that's a big conversation that's happening right now. Well, has been happening for a while about who can use the N-word, particularly in schools, and how it's used. For a Canadian audience picking up this book and your relationship to the word, what can we tell, particularly young folks, about this word and what it means?
Christopher, all I can do is relay my feeling, my sentiment. I'm 65 years old, and you might feel, you're a younger man, you might feel differently. When I have three young men, I asked them about their viewpoint on the best convention for using it in the book, and they felt, for increased impact that I should, but I just could not. And so it's a very personal thing. But for me, it's just a word that should never, ever be used. Again, in my chapter, I say, I don't care the situation. I don't care if it's a rap song. I don't care if it's a intelligent conversation on the subject, or if it's a joke or whatever. I don't ever want to hear the word in my life.
I'm glad you said it, and I'm glad you made it clear. And for folks who haven't read the book, you write N-word in that. So you mean by saying, I'm not even going to put that word in the book. And that's a big thing that I really appreciate about this book, because I was itching for this session, especially what's been happening in the NHL in the past few weeks. And a piece that I think a lot of people might kind of just glance over was when you really get to page 110 and 157 of your book, when you get into the conversation about hazing at WMU, the Broncos, and not just the hazing that you experienced, but particularly your fight and push back to get it ended. How can we really look at those lessons and your experiences as a young man in that space? And when we're now talking about, sexual assault and misconduct in hockey culture, how can we take your experience and apply that into a macro level for everyone to say, hey, this isn't right, and this is what you can do against it?
Yeah, for me, it comes up several times in the book, but for me, the best thing that I did in my life, I believe, is that when I saw something that I disagreed with, I tried to break the cycle. So using hazing as an example, you go into this macho, environment, and there's this tradition. Everybody thinks it's a big joke and it's funny and so on and so forth. Hard to just describe, but very quickly in hockey or in my situation, they shaved you, and it wasn't your head that they were shaving.
Yep.
And painted you the school colors type of thing. And so, kind of rewinding, I was a shy, innocent, naive kid that happens to stand out in hockey, but in life, I was the type of person that I really wanted to be recognized. Even to this day, I don't like doing interviews like this because it's just not me. And so for me to just the idea of, a swarm of hockey players to surround me and denude me and get at the Clippers and so on and so forth, it was horrifying.
Yeah.
And I actually snuck away a couple of times, and my plan was never to have it happen to me. But they got me before practice one day, and I was just so distraught. And so what I said was basically, okay, I'm just not going to allow this to happen to a freshman when I became a senior. Unfortunately, as I say in the book, I got overruled by the other seniors who wanted to enact their revenge on the underclassmen. But because I took that stand a couple years later, it was disbanded. That's like I say is that if you believe in something, then you should live it. And that's what I've tried to do my entire life, and both being a Black man and also with the idea of the hazing incidents.
And I really appreciated that. And I went back, I read this book earlier, and I went back the past couple of weeks, and I thought to myself, this is not only a Black man who is literally fighting, and we're going to talk about the violence and the fighting and that you had to endure as well, but fighting for your place on this team, fighting for your place and your identity as a Black person, as a Black man. But at the same time, you're seeing the injustice for everyone across the board. And is this, I should say, a lesson that we can say, look, okay, you might be marginalized or Black in the space, but it doesn't mean you need to ignore all the other quote unquote bad things that happen. Is this an opportunity for us to galvanize together and say, look, an injustice is an injustice?
I think so. And I purposely wrote the memoir in that fashion. I didn't want it just to be, 300 pages of me talking with slap shots and back checking type of thing. I wanted it to be a life story. But my life was dominated with hockey. And so, of course, that was a big part of it. But yes, I try to include all those other life lessons that I accumulated over the years. And the hazing one was a good example of it.
Big life lesson I took. Watch out for that dynamic stretching. Watch for your groin and that dynamic stretching,
right,
kids.
Right. Yeah.
And for us, we're sitting here. I know you're based now, in the States in South Carolina. And my first introduction to the Saunders name was John, your brother.
Yeah.
And I bring this up because your family is a big component to this book, particularly your relationship with John. How come, and I'll preface it to the younger folks here, for folks who know the Raptors before 2019, John was a big deal, particularly in 95, was a very, very big deal in sports in Canada. How come you two aren't, in your opinion, Black Canadian icons?
Well, I can talk about John. There's no reason for me to be one because I walked away from hockey at an early age. I think maybe Christopher, because we migrated to the States, and John actually is sort of an icon down here. He is well known throughout the country. I think people know, but I'll mention that he worked several years with ESPN and was one of the founding fathers of ESPN in terms of their talent pool. And so the neat thing about John is that, and his legacy, is that two things. Within the walls of ESPN, he became a leader amongst the Black broadcasters. And so he basically formally got a position where he was consulting all the Black broadcasters that were dealing with, racism within the walls or within society type of thing. We're just trying to advance their careers. And then secondarily, John wrote a book called Playing Hurt, because John was inflicted with depression, unfortunately. And so he and I dealt with it for years type of thing. And it was such a struggle for John. But before he passed away, he penned a book called Playing Hurt, that the idea was to bring depression out of the shadows. And so macho guy like a sportscaster if he talks about depression, then
Right.
Any other person can talk about it as well. And so he left that lasting legacy on top of the enormous talent that he had.
And I do appreciate that. And this is, particularly when we talk about mental health, in the 2020s and beyond, like you said, having that quote unquote macho, machismo and whatnot, and have somebody openly talking about that. And for me, I always come back to you, Bernie, because I'm reading this. I'm like the 5th Black person in the NHL. 5th. And one thing I really appreciate, particularly when you highlight at the end, the blacklist, as you call it, we'll talk about the blacklist as well, is that there was a massive gap from the 1st to the 2nd, and then a small trickle. I will argue that you were one of the firsts. If we're talking about number 5, you're one of the first. What was that like? I need folks to understand, what is it like to be one of the first in a sport that actively, and we can talk about from minor, all the way up, that actively tried to literally push you, fight you out at some time to try to knock your teeth out. That story about getting the teeth knocked out, I was like, Bernie, is it worth it? Is it worth it? But what was it? What does that feel like? Because we hear it all the time, and I don't think folks really understand. They might, engage with Willie O'Ree, Herb Carnegie. They might, talk about Jackie Robinson and whatnot, and hear about the first, but never have an opportunity to talk to someone who was a first. What did that feel like?
Well, first, let's go back in history, because this is really important. Like, as you mentioned, there was a 16-year gap between Willie O'Ree, who's the first in the NHL, and Mike Marson, who's number 2 in 1974. So I love Willie and met him. He's a great man, and so on and so forth, and deserves all the accolades that he's accumulating. But there's a but. The but is that, yes, he's a Jackie Robinson of hockey from the standpoint that he was the first. But if you follow the sports model, after Jackie Robinson, I think Larry Doby played that same, I think 2 other Blacks played that same year, and there was an opening for Blacks. And so basically that was a door opening event. Yeah. That's the Jackie Robinson model. Now, coming back to my life, when I was coming up, there's no internet. So we had never heard of Willie O'Ree. Yeah. Never heard of the man. It was me and John living in Montreal and in Toronto, just playing this game that we loved. And we never saw another Black person for most of our youth. It wasn't till later. The first Black player that I ran into was Tony McKegney, and that was at a junior age training camp. So to go back to your direct question, the visual anomaly is obvious. Yeah. I put in the book. So you go to a racetrack, do anything. Go watch NASCAR, and I say, if there's 9 white cars out there and 1 black car, you're going to watch that black car. It's the visual anomaly. It's your eyes are just being attracted to it. So I totally get that, and I understood it, and I knew that was part of my path. But the thing that I didn't expect, and what drove me out of the game, was just the hatred. Yeah. Just because it's a black car doesn't mean you have to hate it. And so almost every rink I went into, people, and I'm talking about men and women, and they're bringing their kids to the rink, and it's just raining down on me, this basic social injustice and vitriol and racism and so on and so forth. And so that's the thing that was very disappointing to me, was I totally understand the visual anomaly, but just the hatred was the thing that disappointed me the most.
And even when you're saying that, because I'm thinking about the passages, and again, I tell folks, if you need to read this book, if you want to get not just a history of hockey or history of Bernie's life, but really understanding what this racism, like explicit racism that Bernie's describing, really feel it. How did you do it? Like how did you go through these rinks, and especially when you're getting it from your own teammates? How did you wake up every day and say, this is my dream, I'm going to still push for it? How?
Yeah, that's a real tough question for me, because you know, if you're a trailblazer, that you're gonna have to blaze that trail, and so you're gonna be facing some things that nobody else is facing. So I totally got that. I totally understood it. And the flip flop is, well, there's two flip flops. One is I just love playing the game so much, Christopher. It's hard. I try to describe it in the book, but when you cross over those boards, you go into a different dimension, and it's just an amazing feeling. And that was my safe space. It was my oasis and everything. And so I just love playing the game so much that it kind of offset the other stuff. And the second thing is that the vitriol kind of got, it increased over time. And so the higher I climbed the ladder, it seemed the more it would increase. And so, you're now playing in stadiums that have, 15,000 people or 10,000 or whatever it is. And now it's just raining down on you. And so it got worse and worse as it progressed up the ladder. And that's when I started to really stop enjoying the game. And then going back to your comment, and it's an important one, for me, it crept into my locker room 3 or 4 occasions.
Yeah.
And that's when it just got to me, because I just felt like, okay, I can take all this other stuff. I can take it from the fans. I can take it from the opponents and whatnot. But now I'm taking it from my teammates, my own locker room. And I felt like I was on an island. And that's when I just felt that hockey was not the game for me.
And I mean, for folks who are involved in team sport, when your own teammates are turning against you, you ask yourself, is it worth it? And this is where I pulled out a direct quote that you had on page 274. Quote, "I do believe my treatment was substandard due to my race," end quote. And I sat there and I thought about that for a second, because at no point did I see you blame or you say, okay, I'm Black, I can't do this, I can't do that. But then you come to this realization, the treatment, and a lot of things you talked about. At one point, you mentioned about, well, if I could speak French, maybe my progress in the Nordiques may have shifted. And I thought there for a second, I was like, maybe if you got drafted by the Leafs, would it have been different? Or a different team? This is a genuine, I sat there and I was like, hey, would it have been different? Possibly if you were white, would it have been different? Like, do you see an alternate universe that you could have been in the NHL for a long career based on your talent alone?
Well, definitely. And that's one of the key points. I'm glad you raised that, because that's a very key point for me that I hope the readers and listeners will understand. Is I'm not sitting here blaming.
No.
I'm not blaming anybody in my career. I had a 3-year contract. I walked away after 2 years. And I walked away because basically the Nordiques, on top of everything else, were inept at the time. I go into training camp and I lead all goal scorers in training camp. What more do I have to do? And we're talking like Peter and Anton Stastny. Peter's in the Hall of Fame. Michel Goulet was on the team, and Dale Hunter, all these players that people would recognize today. I go in there and I led the camp in scoring. And they says, well, we're sending you back to the minors. But then on top of that, it is what it is, going back to the minors, but they didn't have an American League Hockey League team to send me to. So then they sent me to the Nova Scotia Voyageurs, which is at the time the Montreal Canadiens farm team. And they had Guy Carbonneau and Danny Devil and Craig Laughlin and all these players. And so basically, it doesn't make any sense that the Canadians are going to train the Nordics players. And so 3 of us got sent there and we sat on the bench. And so then the 3rd year, they established a team in Fredericton and they wanted to send me there and wanted me to be the captain there. And so at the same time, in parallel with all the racial stuff I'm dealing with, they say, go back to Fredericton and score 50 goals there, type of thing. We'll bring you up there. And that's when I just said, no, I've proven, one of the top scorers in the AHL. I've proven I could play in NHL, and now you're sending me back. So absolutely, if I had gone to a different team, it could have been a very different circumstance. But the point of the story for me is that the racial stuff I was facing on top of the other stuff is what drove me away from the game. Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you mentioned in the book too, the Herb Carnegie moment, where what else do I need to prove? You send me back to the minors. Like, what else do I need to prove? And I want to bring up Herb Carnegie for a second here, you know, because we all know the name Conn Smythe. Like, you know, you're around hockey, you know the name Conn Smythe. How do we reconcile? And you can tell the background. I'll let you tell the background what Conn Smythe said about, you know, Herb.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile that Conn Smythe is still not, well, literally an icon in hockey? You know, how do you reconcile the racism of Conn Smythe, particularly towards Carnegie? Like, how do we reconcile that, particularly in a moment where we're going back in history and, you know, changing names of universities in Canada and so on and so forth? How do we reconcile this?
You know, I went back and forth on this. The interesting thing about writing a book is that you're able to, you know, tweak your opinions and so on and so forth. And initially, when I wrote the book, I basically called for the Conn Smythe Trophy to be changed. But after giving it more thought, I felt, you know, one, it's really difficult applying today's standards to yesterday's ills.
Yeah.
And so this happened years ago and whatnot, and it was, you know, obviously a very different world and a different time, different Canada. But the thing that I would like to see is the reverse. I'd like to see Herb Carnegie better recognized. And that's why I say in the book is that forget Conn Smythe, Herb Carnegie, if you read the story, this man would have been a superstar in the NHL. And again, hockey historians or sports historians are loath to make those comparisons because it didn't happen. The same with me, you can't make those comparisons because it didn't happen. But that's why I put a whole chapter on Carnegie, because he skated toe-to-toe with Jean Beliveau and Doug Harvey and so on and so forth. And minimally, it's okay. If he wasn't going to be a superstar, he still would have been, you know, an NHL regular.
Yeah.
And he's essentially been lost because the color of his skin. So I look at it reverse and say, you know, leave the other people can form opinions on what to do with Conn Smythe, but I just think hockey itself should recognize Herb Carnegie in a much bigger degree than it does today.
So glad you said it, because I need folks to read the book, because I feel like we're having an inside conversation right now, because the nuance that you talk about is that you don't, and I think if people read the title of the book, they're like, oh, this is a black man complaining. But there's so much nuance that you put in your experience about being black. Like you said there, it's like, I'm not, you know, Conn Smythe, whatever. Okay, cool. It happened, whatever. But how can we just uplift somebody else? And for me, because I know you relate, you know, towards the end of the book about PK Subban and, you know, black folks now in the sport. Are we kind of seeing the same thing in a way?
Boy, that's Christopher. That is that's a tough one for me. And I actually wrote a chapter on this, and it got so intense I deleted the chapter. Because here's the thing. I'll try to do this in a nutshell.
Yep.
Because hockey has its slogans, and they say hockey is for everyone. I vehemently disagree.
Okay.
But here's my opinion. So now hold on, for you got to hear me out here. Hockey is a great game and it's doing really well for itself, right? I see it as kind of a boutique league because I live in South Carolina and there's not a lot of hockey down here. But you're in Hockey Craze Canada and so on and so forth. There's pockets in the United States. So it's a nice boutique, but it's not Walmart type of thing, you know. NFL is Walmart. Hockey is this nice little boutique that some people visit. So if hockey wants to be a Walmart, then I think changes are necessary. But if you're happy with the little boutique, then I don't think changes are necessary. So using PK Subban as an example, and I write about this in the book, is that hockey is a conformist league. So a perfect example is scoring celebrations.
Yep.
Everybody has to do the same thing. You score, you raise your stick in the land, then skate to the bench, and you do this flyby, and everybody's the same. And the other thing is, don't smile. Watch some of these scores. They get this banker's look on their face, like, no, you can't smile. You might show up your teammate, your opponent type of thing. So everybody does the same thing.
Yep.
So PK Subban comes in the league, and to me, he's just a black man acting black, and he wants to party a little bit. Yeah, it's a fun thing to score an NHL goal. I want to go. I want to celebrate. Yeah. And by the way, that's going to pump up the fans, and that's going to pump up other people, type of thing. But no, PK, you join this country club, and in this country club, you're not allowed to celebrate. You have to do the standard protocol like everybody else. So I look at it two ways. Is that if hockey wants, especially if Canada wants to preserve that, that's fine. It's a great game. You've got a great game. You got a great product. And the flip side is all the brothers that want to go in this country club, that's the rules, Christopher. Like if I join a country club here, I know there's rules, and I'm going to have to abide by those rules. I'm not going to go in there and start showing off and so on and so forth. So all my black brothers, if you join this country club, those are the rules,
right?
And you have to abide by them. And that's what happened to PK Subban, is they tamped him down, type of thing. And now, he's just not the same player that I saw when he first played in Montreal.
Yeah.
But the flip side is that hockey is just leaving so much on the table, so much money and opportunity. PK Subban could have been a marketing bonanza for the league.
Yep.
Bonanza for the league. That guy's smile and his talent, his personality.
Yeah.
And he was already starting to show up on the late night shows in the States and doing stuff that no hockey player did before.
Yeah.
No, you got to tap him down. PK, you can't do that. And now, you got a kind of an average player now. So I think that hockey basically has to decide, because the front office is saying hockey's for everyone. And I say it's not for everybody. It's for a conformist. Like a perfect example I use, which is kind of funny, is that what happens if like a neon Deion Sanders comes in? Come on, Chris.
Good luck. Good luck.
The system will implode, right?
Yeah.
It'll implode. And so, like I said, it's a great product. It's a great game. It's fast and furious and whatnot. It's a great product, and so it doesn't need to change. But if it wants to be for everyone, then it really has to take a close look at itself. And last thing on this point is that I believe the way you make the changes, it's not the head office or whatnot, it's the players. It's on the ice. That's where the change has to occur.
I'm so glad we're recording this, because that was a gem.
Thank you.
That was a gem, especially for Canadians to understand, as a Canadian in South Carolina, to say, what, hockey is a boutique. It's great, but it's a boutique. And it's something that you really hit that I just want folks to really contextualize here. And tying in, your point on Herb Carnegie, tying in the point on your talent. Because again, I remember you put the stats right there in your book. I was number 3, right? In the preseason. Is that racism at the end of the day impacts, I'm going to say white folks, and I'm generalizing now, impacts the NHL from not having the best talent, yourself, Herb Carnegie, but also, like you said, is impacting their bottom line with PK. Like, if you want the game to grow, particularly in the US, particularly, in different demographics, and we've seen, especially if you're in Toronto, we've been seeing how the game has grown, the NBA has grown because of the personalities of Vince Carter's, the Kawhis, and so on and so forth. And for you, a big thing that I sit here and I keep on thinking to myself, because I'm talking to a living legend here. This is who you are. You're a living legend. Let's be honest, okay? You're a living legend. It's, if you were Gary Bettman, hopefully retires after 29 years, just hoping, what would you change with the game? Say the 2022, you're a new commissioner. What would you change with the game?
Well, what I would do, it's interesting, and I think there might be a book on this subject for me, but the first thing I would do is I would get with the players and say, okay, we have to make a decision. And it goes back to what you said. If we're fine with where we are right now, then we're fine. Like I said, that it's, we got this country club, and this is the way we're going to operate, period. That puts every other discussion to bed. If we want to expand and we want to be for everyone and so on and so forth, we have to look at methodology for doing so. And for me, once again, the head office can come up with all the slogans in the book, hockey's for everyone and so on and so forth, but it's got to be the players. And so what I would do is I would convene some type of player meeting where we'd have representatives for all the players, and I would say, okay, we're going to update all of our quote unquote unwritten rules, because the thing with hockey is that most of the guiding principles are unwritten rules.
Oh, wow.
Nobody sat down and in a conference room and wrote these things down and say this is going to be our scoring celebration. There's all these things that are guiding this game that just happen, and if you say, well, who made that up? I don't know. We just do it because that's the way we do it here, type of thing. So scoring celebration, as an example, is a perfect example. You look at an NFL. Somebody scores a touchdown off a beautiful play. They do a little dance and whatnot. They show a replay of the dance. What I'm saying? Because it's fun and exciting. Let's have some fun. This isn't banking.
Yeah.
This is sports. We're supposed to have fun here, type of thing. Hockey. So my point is that let's sit down with our players and say, we think the game should be more exciting, type of thing, and let's look at all these rules, type of thing, to see what our guiding principles are doing. And if they're serving us and we agree with them, like there's certain unwritten rules. Perfect example is there's one of the unwritten rules of hockey is that if you're in a fight, you get a guy down, you don't hit him.
Hit him, yeah.
That's a good rule. I'm saying let's keep that rule. So there are rules that are good. I'm not saying everything's bad, but some rules I think are holding the game back from going to the next level. And like I said, it's a wonderful product in Canada, but I've lived in the United States for a lot of years. Like I said, hockey is almost unknown down here.
I hope someone's listening at the NHL right now, because I want you as the next commissioner, Bernie. We need you. And I know we got some questions here in the Q&A, but the thing is, there's a piece here, and I challenge my students with this all the time. I say, why do we use Colin Kaepernick as the moment of time of Black activism in sport? And I bring this up because of your final season in the IHL, where you decided to use a Black power, because we're talking about celebrations now. You decided to do the Black Power fist in your final season after you scored a goal. What place and what pushed you to have that sentiment? Because for me, I was literally thinking about your entire life, came to this moment, and you're like, you know what, this is it. But what drove you to do that, your final season in the IHL, to have that Black Power salute?
The book for me is a book about empathy. So I hope the readers will read the book and put themselves in my skates as it would be. Or use any parallel. The one parallel I use is that a musician. Yeah. You play whatever instrument your entire life. You come up the ladder. You play beautiful music, and you finally make it to Carnegie Hall or whatever big facility.
Yep. Yep.
And people throw stuff at you. They boo you. They make monkey sounds and call you names. For me, it was just so disappointing to work my entire life. My entire life, and I was a nerd, and so a sports nerd, but a nerd, and so I wasn't going to the movies and going to the prom and stuff like that. I was working on my game almost every day of my life.
Yep.
And so when I got to the mountain, I was so prepared to play, and the mountain rejected me. It was just shocking to me, especially when I made it to the NHL. And so it was just so hurtful for me to work my entire life and to be rejected by the sport that I loved. I felt, even though I don't want to draw attention to myself, I felt I've got to do something for Bernie Sanders. Yeah. And so it was a quiet kind of defiant oppose. But for my last year in IHL, I raised the Black Power fist every time I scored a goal.
And I mean, it hit me because I know you talked about the 1968 Olympics, Mexico Olympics. You brought that there. And for me, I was reading that thinking to myself, as Canadians engaged in sport, we don't need to look at the Colin Kaepernick. I'm not dismissing, Kaepernick, but, hearing your story and seeing what you endured and, like, as you said, making it to that promised land and the pushback, it hit me because, and one thing before we get into the audience Q&A, I want folks who are not even engaged in hockey, right, to to hear your story, right? About that perseverance. Like you said, in any field that you've worked your life for, that you finally make it, and then people just don't want you there. And I think that's what kind of really resonated with me, is that this is a story about hockey. This is a story about family, the way you supported your mother, all of fighting. The teeth story, man. The teeth, when you got your teeth knocked out, I was like, Bernie, just take the rest of the game off. Your teeth look fantastic now, but I was like, just take the rest of it.
Yeah, not a hockey player.
So I appreciate that. So I know we have some questions here from the audience, just being mindful of time. So the first question popped up here. So this is from Mike Bellows. So, quote, it seems to me that Chicago has historically and more recently made decisions to prioritize winning over the physical and mental health and safety of some of their more vulnerable players. Can you comment on toxic cultures that may be longstanding in venerable sports institutions? Are there any NHL level organizations leading the way or doing a good job where equality and anti-racism are concerned?
Well, I referred to that earlier, where I actually think you have to give the NHL credit. The NHL has a staff. They actually have a staff on this subject. So what more would you want? Now, you can make the argument that the staff isn't fully empowered, and it's a difficult job. And if you look at that job, basically, it's a job that's difficult to gauge, because how do you measure success type of thing. So what I always come to believe when I talk about this is that it has to be a we problem. I write in the book, meaning in every situation, using myself, there's a chapter when I played for the Pickering Panthers, and my coach was a guy that become a lifelong friend of mine, Sherry Basson. When things would happen to me on the ice, my teammates rallied. So there's one really touching moment, for example, where we're in this key game. We're in the enemy rink. It's just filled to the rafters. The racial stuff is raining down on me. Coach Basson stopped the game. He stopped the game and he says, I want this one guy thrown out of the rink. And the referees came over, and the referees were saying, Coach, if you don't put your team on the ice, you're going to forfeit this game. And he's like, we'll forfeit the game. He said, either this guy goes or we go, type of thing. And after a prolonged period of time, the player was thrown out of the rink. And again, I'm this shy, quiet guy. I'm staring down at my skate laces. I'm so embarrassed that all the focus is on me. But what I wrote right at the end of the chapter is racism should be a we problem, not a me problem. And that's the point. Other players say, well, what can I do? Take a stand. I read about the stuff like a Akeem Alou type of thing when he's playing rap music in the locker room. Well, if that happened, his teammates should have, taken a stand and said, well, we're not playing for this guy, type of thing. And so I think if other people stand up, I think we'll be a lot better off.
This is actually a perfect segue, because we have a question here from Trevor asking, what are your thoughts on how the NHL is currently failing Akeem Alou and how they can do better, not just for him, but for other people of color?
Yeah, again, that's the answer for me, is that, well, obviously, it's a multi-layer thing, because there's several things you do, and the league offices are doing many of them. But again, for me, it's the players. And I'll back up again, because as I said earlier, if the NHL doesn't want to change, if the NHL wants to get this country club, and these aren't going to be the rules that they're going to abide by, I think we as brothers got to say, well, I'm going to get up my basketball, or I'm going to get my baseball or football type of thing, because this sport isn't for me.
Yep.
But the sad thing is that there's so many talented players, there's so many talented players that hockey doesn't get, because blacks aren't interested. I mean, could you imagine if LeBron James had been a right winger? And
6'8", jeez.
And Christopher, the amazing thing is that a success of a player like that will fill the pockets of all the other players. I mean, talk to somebody in golf,
Tiger Woods
type of thing. So that's the irony, is that I wish that the best black players were drawn to the game, but they're just not, and they won't be until some of these measures that I'm talking about take place. But for a person like Akeem Alou, the poor guy's been run out of the league because he came in with guns a-blazing type of thing, and just like PK, the system rejected him, and so it's a sad story. But I think the whole system the game itself. And then, like I said, the players have to come to terms with this.
And just following up on that quickly, I'm so glad you mentioned this is a we, not a me problem. And at the end of the day, if folks want to see what the winning purses were in golf before Tiger Woods versus after Tiger Woods, you might want to get the most talented people
that's
in
that's
your sport.
It's an incredible thing to me. It just raises the time.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I got another question here from Kendra. So she's saying that fighting is a big part of the game. A few times in this discussion, Bernie's experience with fighting, just lost it there. Bernie's experience with fighting is really, talked about in this space. What role do you think race played in your engagement in fighting?
A big player, so there's certain levels. There's obviously just spontaneous combat. Like if somebody elbows you in the chin, you're gonna want to do something about it. And so I had spontaneous combat, but I hate to put a percentage on it, but a large percentage of it for me was just somebody taunting me. And earlier in my career, I dropped my gloves. It was Pavlovian. Like I heard that word, my gloves were off type of thing. But the problem is you're playing a team sport. And so if you act individually, for example, I'm a goal scorer. If I fight you, I'm sitting in the penny box and I can't score goals and help my team.
Okay.
So that's the difficult thing being a Black player is you have to put team in front of yourself. And it's hard, it's difficult, and it hurts. And it's not for everyone. And that's going back to questions with other players. If you can't do that, then hockey's not the sport for you.
Yep. Good point. And the follow-up here is that Kendra asked, is fighting necessary? Is it really necessary part of the game?
Yeah, I'm a person that hates fighting. Obviously, being a Black player, I had to fight a lot and I had to become pretty good at it. I don't think it's totally necessary. I don't mind a fight when it's, again, spontaneous. Like if you're walking down the street and somebody elbows you in the chin, you're not going to say, "Hey, have a nice day." You're going to want to do something.
Hey.
And so I think a certain level of it is okay for a game because it's a rough and tumble game. But if I'm honest, go to the heart of the question, it absolutely can be done with hockey, be done with fighting. For example, I played, as you can tell in the book, I'm a product of the US colleges where I played at Western Michigan University. There, if you fight once, you get a multiple game suspension. And then if you fight again, they tack more games on. When I played, they only played something like 44 games or something like that. And so you start to lose 4 or 5 games. That's a big chunk of your season. So nobody fights. So basically you can make it illegal and stop it. I actually think that a certain level of it is okay, because what I like about it is that it's a system of self-policing. So if there's a guy out there that's a small guy type of thing, and he wants to take a stick to me type of thing, he needs to know that no, I'm not going to stand for that, right?
Right.
Because so the self-policing aspect of it, I think, is necessary, but again, I think it gets way too accelerated to the point where there's too much fighting. Interestingly, though, I don't watch a lot of hockey, but since I wrote this book, I've been watching more, and the NHL has really squelched a lot of the fighting to the point where I think that they need more fighting, because because what I see out there now is I see guys that in my day wouldn't go to certain spaces or wouldn't do certain things. They're doing stuff because they know nothing's going to happen to them.
Oh, okay.
So the system of self-policing has been lost, and like anything, I think they might have shifted too far to the other side, and I'd like to see it balance off a little bit.
Yeah,
and it's funny because I'm not a proponent of fighting, but I just think a little dose of it helps the game.
See, this is why you're gonna be commissioner. I'm telling you, if I have a vote, it's Bernie. Just be mindful of time. We have a question here from Kevin. I remember reading George Laraque's book, and he had a lot of experience of people trying to push him out. And he wrote about discovering Black hockey history, notably the CHL in Nova Scotia, the Colored Hockey League.
Yeah.
And how even after his playing career, that gave him an even stronger feeling of legitimacy within the sport. Did you find any similar inspiration while writing your story or new discoveries that give you optimism with regard to the game and or the league?
Yeah, that's a great question because I really did. What I purposely did in this book is I think a lot of my Black brothers have been lost to history.
Yeah.
And so I tried to mention every Black player that I had encountered throughout my lifetime, going all the way back to the colored hockey leagues, because there's so many people that there's almost a sense of when you leave the game as a Black person, at least this is what I felt, it was so hurtful, I never wanted to return. So it's almost like a sense of PTSD type of thing.
Right.
And so we walk away and we never come back. And so I wanted to bring all those players back, and all the way back to the colored hockey leagues, where I think people know, but those players, those Black players, are responsible for goalies going down.
Yep.
And the slap shot, like major innovations in the game, came from brothers because they're playing the games like a Black player type of thing. So yeah, I was inspired by everybody, and I tried to bring as many stories to life as I could within my book.
Appreciate that. I want to jump in at least one more question from Lisa. I think this is a very good question that we can end off on here. Is Lisa asks, what advice would you give to young athletes of color, especially if they are making a decision to commit to a university program?
Play hockey?
I'm assuming, yeah, playing hockey, yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to the early conversation where, and this is a little bit controversial, but again, I think hockey is a conformist league. And so if you want to play this game, then when you join a country club, you got to figure out how this country club operates and play within the confines of that. But if you want more for hockey, then I think people need to speak out like we are right here, and that this has been a great discussion. But for a young player, just like when I would just say to be passionate about what you do, put everything that you can into it. And I write in the book, I happen to be lucky because I had two really great mentors and coaches that really helped me along my career. But for me, I also did a lot of stuff on my own. So don't wait for somebody else to come and take you under the wing and say, this is the way you do this. You can get out there and seek information. There's a lot of off-ice things you can do, get on the ice and so on and so forth, and just pour everything you can into your passion. But lastly, that's the athletic side. Pack a parachute, like I did. Get your education, because I don't care if you're the next Wayne Gretzky. An education is going to serve you well.
Bernie, I know this is not going to be our last conversation, at least between you and I. This isn't going to be our last conversation. Like I said, you are a living legend to me. I appreciate this opportunity. You shared your story in the book. And one thing I'm going to let you know quickly, I don't know if you know, but Ajax, and it's very important in your book, Ajax now has the highest per capita Black population in Canada. For municipalities municipalities over 100,000. Ajax, and this is for folks read the book. This is important to learn about your experience with Ajax.
Fantastic.
So I mean, you need to come back to Ajax and talk to these Black kids, because that could be the next you out there, Bernie.
I definitely will. That's exciting to learn.
Fantastic. So Nathan, I'm gonna shoot back to Nathan again. Bernie, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Bernie and Chris. And some hard truths. Hockey is a boutique league. I'm a person who loves the game, but it makes sense because I'm also a person who was shocked and disappointed by PK Subban's bouncing, being bounced from the Habs. Like how could you let a Norris Trophy winning, young, dynamic, unbelievably generous to the community? My family's out from that area. Like, why would you ever let that walk away? And it's disturbing, to say the least. But thank you so much for these conversations. They're really important. And, I hope to see the game I love grow and be less fearful, less fearful of the individual, and embrace that, because you're right. Like I love the idea of Tiger Woods, increasing the purses for everyone, like just at an economic level. Exactly. You can make that. And, you know, in some ways the NHL is the bank, and Bettman, you know, he is a banker. And
Right, right.
maybe that's the only argument he can understand. So thank you. I really fascinating and wonderful conversation. And to tonight's audience, thank you for choosing to spend some of your evening with us and for your questions. And one lucky viewer will receive a copy of Bernie's book, and we will contact the winner by email tomorrow. And thanks as well to Rebecca Silver and the team at HarperCollins Canada for their ongoing support of author book launches at launches, not lunches, at Kitchener Library. And of course, Wordsworth Books. We appreciate their ongoing support of our author events. Copies of Shut Out are in stock, and they are kindly offering a discount if you mention attending this event. So head on down to Wordsworth Books. For information on more 85 Queen book launches and lectures, please visit kpl.org/85Queen or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And as we do with all our 85 Queen events, we will be posting this 85 Queen event on the library's YouTube channel, so we invite you to share it. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a great weekend, and good night, and see you soon.